Picture this for a second. It's the dead of winter, 1619, right near the town of Ulm in Germany. Outside, an absolute raging snowstorm. But inside, there's this 23-year-old French soldier named René Descartes, and he's stuck indoors, basically just huddled in a stove-heated room. Now, with literally nothing but time on his hands, he makes a completely radical, kind of mind-bending decision. He decides he's going to doubt absolutely everything. I mean, everything. His senses, his physical body, math, even his own mind. He resolves right then and there to believe zero things that he cannot absolutely 100% prove. Now, he doesn't know it yet, but inside that tiny snowbound room, the entire modern world is about to be born.
Because out of that terrifying absolute doubt came what is probably the most famous breakthrough in Western thought. Descartes realizes, okay, I can doubt everything, but I actually can't doubt the fact that I am doubting, right? Something has to actually be doing the doubting. And from that tiny realization, he gets a single undeniable certainty. I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. And from this one little seed of truth, he essentially attempts to rebuild the whole of human knowledge.
So, welcome to the grand finale of our Explainer series. We've made this huge journey from the ancient Greek coastlines all the way through the medieval monasteries, and today we are tackling a massive 400-year stretch. We're talking the era from the Renaissance right up to the year 1900. These are the specific centuries and the specific thinkers that literally built the very mind you are using right now to listen to my words.
Here is our roadmap for today's journey. We'll start with Renaissance humanism, move into the rationalists, and then their rivals, the empiricists. After that, we'll hit Kant and the Enlightenment, dive into 19th century fire, and wrap it all up with what I call the unbroken conversation. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. Renaissance humanism, and a massive shift to the human sphere.
You see, the Renaissance in the 1400s wasn't just about those incredible paintings. It was a really profound shift in how we focused our attention. Thinkers started pulling their gaze away from looking exclusively at God and heaven and brought it right down to the individual human here on Earth. They even started writing in their everyday native languages instead of formal Latin. Two figures really nailed this shift for us. First up, Niccolò Machiavelli. He wrote The Prince. Now, he completely detached politics from morality, essentially doing this objective analysis of how power actually works in ruthless reality, rather than how we maybe wish it worked. And on the flip side of that, we've got Michel de Montaigne. He basically invented the essay format purely to examine himself. He'd look at his own human flaws, his own doubts, right out there in public, just constantly asking, what do I know? It was this quiet but totally revolutionary shift in individual thought. Which brings us to part 2, the rationalists, trusting pure reason. This brings us right back to Descartes sitting by that stove. This entire movement wanted to build a foundation of knowledge so rock solid that absolutely no one could ever knock it down. Rationalism basically argues that your senses, well, they can lie to you, but pure logic cannot. So the key takeaway here is they trusted pure reason over physical experience. Descartes famously split all of reality into two totally distinct types of stuff. You've got the thinking mind and you've got the physical body. And honestly, every single modern debate we have today about consciousness or whether artificial intelligence can actually think, it's all rooted right here in this exact framework. Then you have Baruch Spinoza, who was a Dutch lens grinder. He used pure reason to argue that God and nature are literally the exact same thing, just one infinite substance, which meant to him that everything happens necessarily and free will, just an illusion. Now, his community actually excommunicated him for this, but fun fact, Albert Einstein later called Spinoza his favorite philosopher. And then there's Gottfried Leibniz. This guy reasoned that the whole universe is made up of these tiny, indivisible units of experience he called monads. Using pure logic, he declared that since God is perfect, this reality must logically be the best of all possible worlds. It's a wildly optimistic view, one that the writer Voltaire would later just absolutely roast after a horrific earthquake struck Lisbon.
But right across the English Channel, a massive intellectual backlash was brewing, and this sets up the greatest philosophical showdown of the era. On one side, you have the rationalists, trusting pure reason and logic. On the exact opposite side, you have the empiricists. They look at the rationalists and basically say, you guys are living in the clouds. The empiricists argued that pure reason on its own is empty. To them, absolutely all knowledge comes entirely from sensory experience.
So, part 3, the empiricists, finding knowledge from experience. The empiricists are the ones arguing that if you haven't seen, touched, or felt something, you simply cannot know it.
The big foundational idea here is tabula rasa, championed by John Locke. It literally translates to blank slate. Locke argued that when you are born, your mind has absolutely nothing in it. Every single thing you know was written onto that slate by your actual life experiences. And taking this idea of human equality at birth a step further, Locke argued that every human has natural built-in rights: life, liberty, and property. Now, if that phrase sounds a bit familiar, it's because Thomas Jefferson lifted those ideas almost word for word when he wrote the American Declaration of Independence.
But empiricism, it gets wild really quickly. George Berkeley took it and pushed it to the absolute edge of reality. He argued that if we only know what we perceive, then things only exist when they are actually being perceived. Like when you leave a room, he said it only stays there because God is continually watching it. Wild, right? And then along comes a very cheerful Scotsman named David Hume, who essentially steps in and just dismantles everything. By looking strictly at experience, Hume proved we don't even have a constant self. We're just a bundle of passing feelings. He showed that science's big assumption, that the future will act like the past, cannot actually be logically proven. And he proved you can never derive a moral value from a physical fact. Hume just cheerfully left all of philosophy in absolute ruins.
Enter Part 4, Kant and the Enlightenment, the grand synthesis. Okay, so philosophy desperately needed a rescue mission from Hume's massive skepticism. Now, the 1700s Enlightenment was all about this daring attitude to think for yourself. Let's see how Immanuel Kant pulls this rescue off. Kant was a Prussian professor who was so punctual his neighbors literally set their clocks by his daily walks. He said reading Hume woke him from his dogmatic slumber, and he spent 12 years reading a massive book just to fix the problem. The result? What we call his Copernican Revolution. First, he agrees with Hume. We cannot know the world directly as it actually is. But, and here is the genius part, second, he argues the mind isn't just a passive blank slate. It actively shapes every single experience. Concepts like space, time, and cause and effect, they aren't out there in the physical world. They are the built-in software, the very lenses of the human mind itself. He brilliantly synthesized reason and experience together. Kant also totally revolutionized ethics with his Categorical Imperative. This was a strict, duty-based rule saying you should only act on principles that you'd want everyone in the entire world to follow, and you must always treat humans as ends, never as mere tools. This exact concept is literally the bedrock of modern human rights law today. And in that same bold Enlightenment spirit, we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He published The Social Contract, famously asking why humans are born free but are everywhere in chains. He argued that a legitimate government requires the consent of the governed, and that idea was so explosive it directly helped fuel the French Revolution. Which brings us to Part 5, 19th Century Fire. Philosophy accelerates. After the Enlightenment, things speed up dramatically. As the Industrial Revolution starts totally changing the world, the neat, grand philosophical systems of the past start to splinter into these fiery, individual frameworks. One of the absolute most powerful is utilitarianism. Built in England by thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, it offers this beautifully simple equation for morality. The right action is whatever produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. It focuses entirely on consequences. It is incredibly practical, and honestly, it remains the dominant, underlying framework used in global economics and public policy today. But just look at how rapidly thought splinters across the rest of the 19th century. George Hegel comes along and argues that reality isn't static at all. It's a dynamic unfolding of history driven by the painful clash of opposing ideas. Then, Karl Marx takes Hegel's historical struggle and just flips it. He argues history isn't driven by ideas, but by class struggle and who owns the means of production, predicting the inevitable collapse of capitalism. Meanwhile, Soren Kierkegaard looks at all these massive, sweeping historical systems and pushes back hard. He says no, the individual is what actually matters. He argues that faith isn't some logical conclusion you arrive at, it's a personal leap, which essentially births modern existentialism. And finally, Friedrich Nietzsche. He warns that the scientific age has essentially killed the old Christian moral order. And without that cosmic meaning, he argued, we have to become the creators of our very own values. In 1889, Nietzsche famously saw a horse being beaten in the streets of Turin, threw his arms around its neck, collapsed, and totally lost his sanity. But his challenge? It shattered the old world forever. Moving to our final part, Part 6, the unbroken conversation, a 30-second recap. Let's just take a collective deep breath here and snap all these massive, dense, philosophical puzzle pieces together. Here is your rapid-fire summary. We started with the Renaissance, putting humans squarely at the center of the picture. Then we hit the Grand Divide. Rationalists like Descartes trusting purely in reason, while empiricists like Locke and Hume trusted purely in experience. Kant stepped up during the Enlightenment to brilliantly synthesize the two together. And finally, that 19th century explosion gave us Hegel's history, Mill's utilitarianism, Marx's revolution, Kierkegaard's existentialism, and Nietzsche's intense demand for new values. 4 centuries, just an incredible unbroken lineage of thought. So why does any of this matter to you today? Well, because every major modern debate we are having right now is really just a continuation of this exact same 2,600-year unbroken conversation. When we sit around and argue about artificial intelligence, we are literally arguing Descartes' mind-body split. When we debate climate policy, we're very often weighing Mill's utilitarianism. Our natural rights and our laws, they are quite literally built straight on top of Locke and Kant. The stakes are simply bigger now, but the underlying questions, who we are and how we should live, they remain exactly the same. Which finally brings us to the end of this Explainer series. We started episodes ago with the ancients, and we end here, right at the dawn of the 20th century. You know, Socrates gave us the ultimate challenge when he said, "The examined life is the only one worth living." So my question to you, after walking through the minds of the people who built the modern world, is this: is the conversation still alive in you? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack all of this incredible history. Stay curious, keep thinking, and I'll catch you in the next Explainer.